What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Sisko and Mike Podcast. Mike, Trump's back in office, and with Trump in office, you know what came? A bunch of executive orders, a lot of panic for our community, and we're hoping today's guest can help us with that. You know, she's an immigration lawyer, a criminal defense lawyer, and workers' comp lawyer as well, right?
I do a bit of personal injury when it involves our undocumented community.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we want to thank Cynthia Santiago for joining us.
Welcome to Sisko and Mike.
Yeah. Another way to say immigration and criminal is crimmigration is the term that's used with the mix that, you know, is so important for people to know that if they have a criminal issue and they're undocumented or they have, they're not citizens, and it's always good to have someone that has both.
I had never heard that.
Both areas. Yeah. Crimmigration. Yeah.
Nice.
Is that something that you made up, or is that something that's been...
I mean, I think it's, past 10 years or so, because it was such a niche area. It's such a area that communities, unfortunately, don't know the effects until way after in their deportation process.
So you were mentioning to us that you're half Guatemalan and...
My mom's Guatemalan. My dad's Mexican. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And you grew up in Santa Monica, I think you said?
Yes. So my parents met in Santa Monica in the 70s. We grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment with my brothers and my sister, and we just, but my house, like, I just remember things like my house was like a place of refuge for a lot of people that are coming to the U.S. My parents were some of the first people in their families to be in the U.S. So there was always, que viene alguien de Guatemala, alguien que, that just got here from Oaxaca. And so there was people that my parents always gave refuge to. So that's probably like what stuck in my head. And so I think back about that and I'm like, yeah, like my parents were always helping people that were newly in the U.S.
Now, question.
Yes.
During this time, were your parents also immigrants, or had they already gotten illegally there?
Yeah. So my parents were able to benefit with the Reagan policies. So they were able to benefit during that time. But unfortunately, they had like some back and forth stuff with, when my brother and my sister were younger. Thankfully, I was not involved in that kind of situations where, they would be crossing or have, a little bit of run-ins. But they had status. And then when I was, I don't know, like probably in elementary school, I think they became citizens. But my interest to become an attorney was because when I was 9, my brother went to prison wrongfully accused of a robbery. And I think that was really what set me off, is like seeing how vulnerable my parents were in that process. My parents didn't know where to go for help. And when they got quoted for a defense attorney, it was like $40,000.
Yeah.
And they don't have that kind of money. They were both hourly. My mom was cleaning houses or nanny. My dad was a mechanic. So it just really impacted the way that I saw the justice system.
Oh, crazy.
I think it's weird because we all have that same common childhood where we have to be the ones kind of like a defense attorney for our parents. We're the ones interpreting everything, helping them out with documents, paperwork, and things like that. So, I mean, you took the other route and actually became a lawyer. So some of us didn't do that, but excuse me. So that was your first taste of it. And is that what's really like, why immigration? Was it because you guys always had refuge over at your home, or what was it that really sparked that interest?
Once I got to law school, I had the opportunity to work for a crimmigration attorney, and he's a great experienced attorney that's been doing it for over 35 years. And he asked me one of my first assignments was to go to the consulado in Santa Ana, and I was basically the intake person. So once a week, his office was able to have a representative, and families would come. And a lot of families that came during that time, it was in 2009, 10, a lot of those families were undergoing what was, their family member was arrested for no license, and then Santa Ana and Orange County jail sheriffs would turn them over to ICE. And so somebody with like a no license or a DUI or something that usually we consider like a small misdemeanor was then impacted by a deportation process. So seeing those families and how lost they were reminded me of everything that I went through, but also was like, this is not good. Like we have to like step in way before they go to immigration. We have to step in on the criminal level. And I think that's what it was. It was having to really navigate with the families, like what they could do next and what resources were available. And so I never forgot, I guess, the child in me. Yeah.
How long have you been an attorney?
For 12 years.
12 years?
Yeah.
So how has the process changed? So that means you were under, what was it, Obama?
I've been under Obama. I've been under Trump.
Yep, the first time.
First time. And the Biden administration. I think that what's going on right now is that we're on a full frontal, like very loud attack against the immigrant community, against the folks that are in the country that are undocumented, but also folks that have immigrant backgrounds. And people don't recall that, like, the attacks about the citizenship and birthright is also, like, many of us had parents that didn't have status or grew up in that circumstance. So what we're seeing now is a full frontal, like, in your face. I do think that under the previous administrations, the numbers do show high deportation rates. I did see that when I was an attorney. I would see so many people being shipped to immigration custody after a minor offense, but they weren't so loud about it. Yeah. And there was also a shift. Like, our community started to rise up, and now then we were asking for sanctuary cities. We were asking to end the transfers to ICE. We were also rising up to make sure that we had communities that were safer for our undocumented folks.
I got a question. I've seen some TikTok videos. Obviously, I think they started right before he took office. I think it was last week, sometime like on Saturday or Sunday. They had already executed ICE agents, or not executed, I shouldn't say that. They had already sent ICE agents to, like, different cities to start doing las redadas.
To start prepping.
Mm-hmm. And my question was, and in some of the videos, people would claim, like, hey, I have something going on. I have a case going on.
Pending case.
How is it that they were still getting picked up? Can they pick them up? I mean, it just sucks because I'm like, well, if they have something going on, shouldn't that kind of, like you said, kind of stall?
Yeah. So what we were seeing from last summer, actually, while, Biden was in office, and I think there was a lot of criticism about whether his numbers were high enough, whether they were doing enough about immigration, we started to see a rise in folks going to their interviews that they have to report to ICE. Some people that are on, like, grillete, or they have, grillete is an ankle monitor, or they have some type of reporting with ICE. And people were going in, and people weren't coming out because they were getting deported. So there was some time also a few months ago that this rise was happening to try to bring up the numbers and make the numbers
like a quota.
Yes. And so what we saw this weekend, though, or the past weekend and the week before, is that pretty much, for me, it seemed like the Biden administration was just like, well, you guys are on your own, do what you got to do. And it was very disheartening because I don't play by any of the parties. I know what is justice, and I know what my heart feels about the situation and whatnot. So I don't like to play into the politics side and I felt like the party that was, before Trump is kind of left people vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And it left people vulnerable because, like, for example, DACA. There's all these folks with DACA, and their information is in the system. Their fingerprints are in the system. Their address, everything is in the system. And so during the time that they were in office, there was really supposed to be a big push to legalize their status and to pass something. So for me, it felt like that. Like, it felt like the party also left a lot of people vulnerable to this. And now we see the effects. Like, how easily is it for them?
Now they're going to the door by door.
Yeah.
Or they're going to the actual address.
So, yeah, they'll go to the actual address. So for example, we've heard a case where the person had DACA, got DUIs, and when you get a DUI, you're no longer eligible for DACA. So they were already knocking at the door to pick up the person. The person wasn't there. Nobody opened the door. They left. But it's like, this is a consequence of what happens when your information is in a system, and there wasn't like another route. They weren't legalized. There wasn't a pathway created by the administration. What I've heard of, and what I know through, like, the work that I do with the consulados and the work that I do with nonprofits, is that the number of people that were getting picked up were people that already had orders. people that had already failed their case, they didn't have an appeal pending, or people with crimes, people with significant crimes. Although there could be collateral consequences, meaning like if that person lives somewhere and the other people are there, they could take them too. Yeah. Or in Bakersfield, from my understanding of people in Bakersfield, it was just, a bunch of folks that were out there waiting to, go get a job for the day. And it was collateral consequence, everybody, because that was an easy target for them.
Yeah, it was like group, yeah.
And because of the politics of the city, like the city has politics and police agencies that probably don't get involved much. And so it's a little bit different city by city. When you're talking about LA, I think it's a little bit harder for them to get to LA, but I just saw a picture. They were in downtown LA just this past week. So I think what we're seeing is that they're going to go after easy target, folks that are already in the system and that no longer qualify. And I'm not saying DACA is easy target, because if you still have it, you're still under deferred action.
Well, one thing I was going to say about DACA, we had this conversation when it first came out, remember? And I told you, to me, that's a bullshit.
Band-Aid?
Yeah. Because what I told him, I was like, dawg, how easy is it for them not to start profiling and start creating the profiles of everybody that's putting into DACA? Like you said, all the information's there.
They're biometrics. They're
literally everything.
Their address, their parents. I mean, at that point, you're basically, and I get it. It was the believers, the dreamers who wanted some status. Yeah. But at the end of the day, they didn't really think it through, where it's like...
And not to say that it hasn't benefited.
Yeah.
There's so many people that benefited from the ability to do advanced parole, to come back, to legalize their status. Pero también, like, I spent a lot of years, and I go back to Spanish, sorry, because I do a lot of this in Spanish.
We speak English and Spanish here, so tú hablas como quieras.
But it's like, you also get to a point where we were telling, like, folks, like, please, like, try to get this advanced parole in and, like, do something, because we don't have a lot of time. This isn't permanent. This is a very temporary thing. And I think that was kind of disheartening, because it's like, you wanted folks to also see beyond the DACA, beyond the work permit, and not be too comfortable with it.
Exactly.
Because
you wanted to get that stamp on your passport saying you were here legally. And you're right. We did talk about it. It was a Band-Aid for what people haven't done since the 80s, since the Reagan, we've gone back to this. We've talked about this, and it's just screwed up. Yeah. Lately, I've been fighting my moral compass, right? And I feel like your line of work and your childhood and growing up, how do you separate the two? Because you said you go by the law and by what justice is. How do you separate the two?
In regards to like how I view like the debate between, because this is what I also see in immigration. There's a big divide within our own community.
Yes.
We're not all a whole group together that's united. This is why we don't have the power to fight this, because we're very divided. So there's the view of the good immigrant, the bad immigrant. At the end of the day, I also believe in like redemption. And if the person's crimes were for many years ago and they show a good history, then I think that is good. But immigration doesn't see that. Immigration will go after folks for things that they did in the 90s, things they did 15 years ago. They don't see rehabilitation, redemption. They see crime, check, they don't qualify for something. So that's a big issue, because, I come from a background where I did grow up seeing a lot of loved ones go to jail and prison, and a lot of my friends, and I was always having a heart for them, because you make a mistake and you can learn from it. And so there's that issue where I'm going to represent people to the fullest extent I can, but I also am not responsible for consequences from, unfortunately, what the law is. And the law is that, if you commit a crime and you don't qualify for this, then, you can't renew your DACA if you have a DUI. Well, what I do is I step in and I help to negotiate so that we don't get a DUI and we get something else that's comparable. And that way that person can keep their DACA. So, we do things that try to alleviate the situation. But then there's the other issue too, where during the past administration, there was a lot of folks for humanitarian reasons were being allowed into the U.S. because of the situation in their country, things at war, things that were kind of crazy that we don't experience, that we have the comfort of not living through. But to the same degree, there's folks that have been living here for 25 plus years, raise their kids, work hard, and not everyone has to work hard because that's not what we are. We're a culture here, but they've done so much here, and they've raised kids, and their kids, go off to school, or they don't, or they provide to our whole community, and they don't have any alivio migratorio. They don't have anything available for them. No permiso, no way to get their status. So it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a very hard immigration debate because you want to have compassion, and which I do have compassion for those at the border. I've done so many things at asylum work. I go to the border. I talk to folks. I try to help them understand the system and what they're going to be asked.
I think with the whole asylum thing, like I've always said, it sucks because my ex-wife grew up here, but she was illegal. She was brought here as a kid, and she grew up. She went to elementary. She went to high school. She doesn't know Mexico. You know what I'm saying? And like people like that, it's like, fuck, like, what are you going to do? Like deport them? Like deport them where?
They don't even know how to live over there. Yeah.
And then the asylum people, right? It's like, I've also heard stories of people just using it to come to the United States. Some really need the asylum help and some don't. So it's hard. It's hard to differentiate who really needs it or who gets priority, right? Because that's what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. Who gets priority?
Yeah.
Should they get it before the people that were born? That grew up here, or that have spent 25 plus years raising a family, living a life here? That if they were good to go back to Mexico, they would not know what to do. Like how do you do that?
Yeah. So this is what it is about redefining what immigration is. Like if we redefine that immigration, yes, we have laws to help refugees, asylum seekers. This is part of, what we do. We help other countries. Then let's have a system where people do have the opportunity to present their case, to, go to a hearing, to be entitled to that process. At the same time, I don't think that takes away from our ability to also grant status to people that have a number of years here, have children, can demonstrate good conduct or whatever criteria you want to put on it. I think you can have both of those systems. It's just that whoever's in power is obviously going to make an enemy out of us thinking like, oh, well, those are the enemies or these are the enemies. So that's where I think that we have to think of a different immigration system that it's supposed to be.
You think it's harder for Latinos in the immigration status than some of the other people from other countries? Because I've heard of people that are like...
That's what I was going to get at right now.
Immigration, they apply for it and they get it right away. Like people from, I don't know, Swedish or...
Immigration is so complex that when we think about it right now, we're thinking about just Latinos.
Yeah.
Right? And people see it as that. People probably listening are just thinking, oh, Latinos or, Hispanics. But it's so complex that you're not taking into account refugees that came from
China,
asylum from Ukraine. There was 30,000 people that came from Ukraine. Yeah. But you don't see that, right? So it's kind of like you said, you see...
Or the people that get visas and then they overstay, which is a very high number
especially
that we don't
East
talk
Coast,
about.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the other thing. There are... The treatment between south of the border and north and, east of the U.S. is a lot different. So if you have a European nation, there's things called ESTA. They're like visa waiver programs where the person, I'm not entirely sure what the process is, but they end up getting a visa. And so that visa allows them to enter in and out without having that process that most people south of the border go through. South of the border, you're having to show several elements like your income, your ability, your education level, your family history and whatnot, and wait years to get a visa to come into the U.S. to even visit. But in other countries, they go through the waiver program where they just bypass a lot of things and people are able to come in. So we never really hear about the amount of people that are in the U.S. on overstay, which is a high number. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but there's a high number of people that come into the U.S. on a visa and they stay and never go back. Mm-hmm. And that person basically is able, if they marry a U.S. citizen, they're able to get their green card in less than a year.
Faster because they've already had some type of legal status, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, a person, unfortunately, like from Mexico that has come into the U.S. without permission is not able to, in many cases, this is all general information, obviously, too, my disclaimer, but is not able to generally fix here because they didn't enter legally. So they had to go to Ciudad Juarez.
Yep.
Pero cuando salen a Ciudad Juárez, 10 years, castigo. Then you need a perdón. But your kids can give you the perdón only if you had U.S. citizen parents or residents or a spouse. Mm-hmm. And then there's other things about, did you enter one time or multiple times? Because if you multiple times, then you don't qualify for that. So there's so many little like requisitos that you're in a position that folks can't even fix. And even that process, say they had a clean case, it's even 5 to 6 years. So the perdón alone to get it here in the U.S. is about 40-month wait time.
40 months?
40 months.
So what happened? Okay, so I was going to ask you about that because when I was doing the residency for my ex-wife, it was right around the time that they were barely introducing DACA. Mm-hmm. So DACA hadn't even come out. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I would have sort of applied through that because it was supposed to be faster.
Because it was halfway through Obama's presidency.
So I was in the military at the time, okay? And I was getting ready to get out. It was 2010. I had just married my ex-wife at the time, and I was trying to do her paperwork before I got out because I wasn't sure if I was staying in or getting out. Either way, I said, all right, F it, let's do it. And we finally, in 2012, we got her...
Perdón?
No. Her cita.
Or to Ciudad Juárez.
To Ciudad Juárez. Okay. And we were scared because we were like, well, fuck, what's going to happen? We had 2 little babies. Mm-hmm.
But also there was parole, military parole.
I was out.
Yeah. But you could do it as a veteran.
They didn't. Yeah. No, but I did all the paperwork myself.
Yeah, like la asesoría. This is what I'm saying. And this is what you got to be careful with in our community. Everybody relies on, and I know it's costly. You think attorneys cost a lot of money and all that, but like we all rely on like what somebody else did in their process, what we heard their vecino do, the primo, somebody else. But like I've spoken to families where the dad was a veteran. He was in the military 20 plus years ago. And the attorney they went to was trying to get them to leave. And I was like, for what? Like, you have military parole. And they had no idea. So what you're telling
me is that she never had to go to Juarez?
She wouldn't have to leave.
Wow. She spent 9.5 months
She wouldn't have had to leave if she qualified for military parole.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That brings up an interesting question. You talked about our community and we hearsay, and just little things you hear from other people. What's a good way for people to be able to identify what the proper information is? And I ask this because it sounds like it's an easy answer, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like it's an easy answer.
No, it's complicated. Yeah.
For us, it's difficult. Like sometimes, like the parents are not educated or they may not know the resources available. Yeah. How do you know that someone's not scamming them? How do you know that the information is correct?
Right.
Especially right now, there's so much misinformation.
There's so much information on TikTok. And I even get that too with some of my clients are like, I escuché esta abogada. And I'm like, we got to work here. I'm handling this for your best interest. So we just got to be patient with the process. But I always say this. I say that a veces lo barato sale caro, right? Mm-hmm. So if it sounds like this person's trying to do all these things and they want you to pay up at that spot, at that moment, sign the contract.
By next week, I got you.
And that's one of the biggest challenges is that sometimes I tell folks like, I have to charge consults because I'm a smaller firm, and I don't have like an intake team of non-attorneys giving information. You're never going to hear advice from non-attorneys from my office. You're going to hear it from me directly as an attorney. And so there's that. There's firms that have, 30 people on staff doing free consultas all day on a Saturday, but then they're not even like able to give advice. They're not the attorney. They don't have that background. So you're just hearing a sales pitch. With me, it's like, I'm going through 30 questions to think of a strategy. What is the strategy for this case? And sometimes I have to say, there is nothing you can do because this is the problem with the law and how the law is right now. But be careful if you find someone that's trying to tell you to apply because they're going to get you stuck abroad or they're going to take your money and then you're going to lose your case. A big engaño that was happening in the 90s and 2000s that I hear is arreglar porque tienes hijos ciudadanos and you've been here for 10 years. So there's this process that if you've lived here for 10 years and you have kids, but they don't tell people that you're applying for asylum first. You apply for asylum, you don't go to your cita or you get a denial, and then they refer you to an immigration judge because that's what happens if you lose your asylum case, you get sent to an immigration judge. Now you're in deportation proceedings. And that's where, yes, you can argue that you have kids and that they're going to suffer, but it's not a guarantee. You have to show extreme hardship. Yeah. And that's another level of, layer. It's not my kids are going to suffer because, they're going to be sad. No, it's like my kids are going to suffer because they have this disease, this long life impacting problem that I have to be here for. And you have to have proof and evidence and all that. So it's easy to fall into that. It's so sad. It's so easy to fall into this because we're all hopeful that we want something. But I always tell people, if it sounds too good to be true, talk to another person, get second advice. If they're pressuring you to sign on the spot, otherwise you can't do it, or you pay on the spot, no. When I talk to folks and they have a fishy, like their history is a little bit rocky, they have like entradas y salidas, or they have crimes, and I say, we can't even do anything until we pull your records first. Until we pull all your immigration file, your prints at the border, your criminal history case, and then we can put a plan together. But if someone's saying they don't even care to look at that, then they're not doing their due diligence, which is to look at your case.
And I do want to say something, and I want to say for our community, be careful, because it's always el notario. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to talk bad about notarios. Yeah. Because not all of them are like that. Mm-hmm. But be leery of the notarios that says immigration. Because you're right. Those are the ones that say, hey, dame la feria, firma aquí. And they haven't even looked at your case.
And the notario never signs that case because the notario never has any responsibility for it.
And he's not a legal representative, right?
No. So then the person's application are being sent directly to immigration as a pro se, as a person on their own. ¿A quién le vas a echar la culpa? Like, how are you going to hold them responsible?
Exactly. They are basically they're charging you $5,000 with you thinking that they're representing you, and all they're really doing is just helping you fill a form that you're signing for yourself.
Right. And so with an attorney, if an attorney is preparing your packet, I have to sign off that I'm the attorney, I'm the authorized rep, but that I'm also responsible for the contents of that.
Gotcha.
Speaking of misinformation and things like that, a lot of people in our community are panicking and they're feeling a little scared, Trump signed a bunch of executive actions, and some people don't even know how the process works. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So whenever I do my Know Your Rights events and to the community, I'm always, an executive action is an order from the executive administration, from the president, and it could be a very temporary thing. It's not a law. It's because the law has to be passed through Congress. So this is an action where they're ordering certain, programs or things to be implemented or taking away. So apparently 80 executive orders from the past administration were wiped out on Monday. And so these executive orders function as what the president thinks his authority involves. Then there's Congress. Congress makes laws. Congress, you have to go through the House and the Senate, and you go through that process, and then the Congress brings it up to the president. The president signs it. It's a law. That is set in stone. That is something that only through the courts can be taken away. And it is something that also has impacts for years and years, many years, decades. Then what we're seeing is that there's still the judiciary, the Supreme Court, the courts, the federal courts. And so you're talking about a battle between what the president does, what Congress does, and then what the court, how they interpret
which is all three branches.
All the three branches, yeah. And so that's what we're seeing. So he did the executive order about birthright, saying the birthright, in 30 days, if you were born to an undocumented mother, then you're not a U.S. citizen, even though you were born in the U.S. soil. Then, the federal court said, no, the Constitution is the Constitution. This is what it's interpreted, and this is how it's been. This is what, so they put a stay on that, or they did action on that. And so that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a battle between all of those three, because that's why we have the branches to check each other out. Yeah.
How difficult is that to ratify that, for example, the 14th Amendment for birthright citizenship?
I mean, I don't do a lot of constitutional law, but it is something that the courts are always going to interpret in the favor of how it was drafted and why it was drafted that way. So the folks that, the founding fathers that did all these processes, like, how they wanted it to be interpreted. Is usually what is stronger than how, this president from this administration wants to construe it.
Yeah.
I mean, when was the last time when the Constitution was amended?
Well, actually, the 14th Amendment was ratified like 2 years after it was written. They ratified it. They changed the vocabulary a little bit.
But that was a little back
Oh, yeah,
then.
that was in the 1700s. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's where we're also in this position where, like, we get a new administration that thinks that their power is more.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
We get this administration.
Yeah, this administration.
This guy.
Yeah.
Because other, I mean, Democrats and Republicans have always been in office. Yeah. And nobody has raised so much shit. And excuse my language, but so much shit than this.
The other thing is, it's a psychological thing. So all these things that are being brought out, that all these executive orders being announced, it is a tactic. It is a strategy to confuse our community, to scare our community, to have folks just say, you know what, I can't do this, and pack up and I'm going to leave. It's a strategy. It's a mental mind game. And so that's the other sad part about it, is that we have to continue to inform our community how these things work, and that it's not something that we can, people can either go on one spectrum and, completely just give up with everything because it's too much pressure.
I have a question.
Yes.
So obviously they're going to houses. We talked about at the beginning, but he also talked about identifying people. Obviously we are people of brown color, right?
Yeah.
Can they ask for our immigration status?
That's what I was going to say.
Is that legal?
I was going to bring that up because one of the things you and I kind of mentioned about talking about was the Alien Enemies Act. And that's one of the things that actually, it's only been used during war, during war times.
Yeah.
And during World War II, you remember when they had Japanese encampments?
Yeah, the Japanese encampments.
And it was because of their ancestry. And that's one of the things that people are really scared of right now.
But
because
actually, it happened in 9/11 too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a
They
way.
had certain encampments for Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
So
Guantanamo
that's
Bay and stuff. Yeah.
exactly. So that's one of the things that right now people are scared of, and that's one of the things we wanted to talk about.
So, because ICE is under federal authority, then they're gonna go with the executive order that they're gonna use that as their way. They're gonna use that as their excuse to be able to target folks because of how they appear and whatnot. Obviously, as attorneys and constitutional folks that work on litigation, then we would have to identify the person that was wronged or harmed during that, and then you do demandas, right? You do cases against them for that interpretation of what they think that they can do. But there are states that do require you to identify yourself and your name. For example, California, Texas. So there are also states that on top of, and then Texas too, or Florida also had those, they passed laws. So not only do you have this federal executive order saying that we are giving ourselves a right to stop people based on what we appear they're part of this Alien Enemies Act, but then there's states that also are, supplementing it and making it a stronger issue that, yes, we also as a state pass this law that our officers can stop people based on what they look like. So it would just be a matter then of basically taking this up to the courts and fighting
what
enforceability
kind of
of it.
identification should we carry? Like passport? Because I don't want to carry my passport with me.
So, and in this past week, in one of the situations, I haven't verified completely, but between our attorney groups, there was an incident on the East Coast, and they went into a restaurant, and one of the people that was in the restaurant is a veteran. He's a U.S. citizen veteran, and they tried to make claims that his identification, his veteran card, was not legal. So that's what I'm saying. Like, we have to also work to, if we identify that you've been harmed, then we need to put, a demanda to keep going to make sure that this is ended, But it is something that, unfortunately, because of the administration's order, they think that they can run around and do whatever they want. In California, like I said, there are states that do require you to give when you're stopped to give your information, like who you are, not necessarily answer those rest of those questions about your status and stuff like that. But then there's the other policy about expulsions. I think I mentioned to you where if you have less than 2 years in the U.S. and you cannot show that you've been here for more than 2 years, then you're also in a category of expulsion where it's basically they'll give you a deportation express is what I call it. And they just, es una deportación express, una deportación expedited removal. And so there's also that situation where some attorneys are encouraging people to carry their copies of whatever approval they have. As citizens, you might want to carry your passport, but I also, I'm telling folks that there's like a red card that they're telling people like, don't say anything, don't speak, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm like, this is a baseline for people like to know that they have constitutional rights, but it also isn't going to stop them from detaining you or deporting you if you've already been deported or if you're already subject to, if you're in the system. So for me, it's more about like, I have to talk to folks individually what your strategy is. Like I just happened to drop off an approval for a deferred action for one of my clients. And I said, well, it would make sense for you to carry a copy of this because then at least you could show that you have a trámite that you've been approved for.
Gotcha.
And that, you obviously are in that trámite. But there are folks that like are, more vulnerable because like I said, they have already been deported and there really isn't much you can do to stop a deportation. If you're from Mexico and LA, they were happening in 4 to 5 hours. When I was, first practicing, I used to go and try to stop a lot of them and I did successfully do a number of them, but it was because a family called me in the right amount of time. So say they picked up somebody at 6, 7 in the morning, they're already being processed by 10, 11. They were already putting them on buses and trying to get the bus out by 1 or 2. And so successfully, we were able to put stays in and to say like, this person has a trámite available. This person is going to have an appeal and they would bring the person back. And then it worked with the previous administrations where the ICE officers were giving them extensions to continue to fight their case. What we're going to see here is I don't think they're going to give us extensions anymore.
It's automatic.
Yeah. If you can't show that you have a appeal pending, if you can't show that you already been approved for something, I think that's where we're going to have the difficulty.
So racial profiling is a thing, right? And just to piggyback off that.
Yeah.
So obviously like California, we have to show some sort of identification, things like that. What can normal individuals do or expect? Like say, we've seen all these things on social media. Oh, don't say anything. They give you like a list or a breakdown of things to do. What are some of the actual things we can do?
Yeah. Well, as I was saying, like, I think it really would depend on their particular situation. But if you're talking about a U.S. citizen, I mean, what am I being detained for? Yeah. What is it that you're accusing me of? And then they would pretty much have to let you go. I think there was situations up north in like the Bakersfield area where, they did detain a man who was a citizen and his worker was undocumented. So they ended up, having to detain the worker, but he was free to go after.
Yeah, that was the one with the car, right? In the truck?
I believe so.
They slashed his tires?
Yeah.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to get at.
I was going to ask you, I know that the law, it's very basically... everybody's interpreting it differently, right? But there was I think I read or somebody mentioned in a portion of it says, can somebody, let's say Sisko is illegal, right? And he either doesn't have a case or whatever the reason, but
he's undocumented,
he's undocumented and he's with me or he's in my house. And they come and get him in my house.
Well, they can't come into your house.
They can, right?
Yeah, no.
Without a warrant.
Yeah, they can't come into your house. So...
Can I be basically the question is, can I be criminalized
if I'm in your car driving?
Yeah. So then that's another issue, right? And so then that's what happened in Florida. In Florida, they passed a law. The Florida government, not just federal, the Florida government was like, well, if you're harboring someone that's undocumented, you can be criminalized. You can be taken to jail for that. But it also depends where you're at. So if you're in a home, the home is the most sacred place per our Constitution. that nobody can enter your home. Authorities can't enter your home without a warrant for the entry into the home. ICE officers tend to have an administrative warrant for the person to be arrested, but that doesn't give them the permission to enter into a private residence. So then that's where you have that battle where we tell people, don't open the door under any circumstances, because the moment you even try to, reason, they could take that as put their foot in, then go in. It's something, they could argue that you consented at some degree. So we always tell folks, just for clearer purposes, just don't open the door.
Gotcha.
And
Just act like you're in a home.
if it was a police officer, obviously an authority, local authority, and they were investigating a crime, and they do have a warrant, or they have exigent circumstances, emergency
they have a legitimate
circumstances,
reason to
then they
believe.
can barge in.
Gotcha.
But they're also not going to be waiting for you to give them permission. They're going to go in. Like you've seen when they do raids at a home with criminal law, they just go in. So it's also, that is the problem with unfortunately in our communities, we also haven't been able to differentiate, like, okay, this is what an ICE officer looks like, and this is what the local police officers look like.
Do they have to identify themselves as ICE?
They normally would have to show who they are, but I wouldn't even try to reason with that. If you just if you're not.
Gotcha. You're not sure. Don't
even
Some
try to.
Some of the videos I've seen, it just says police.
Yeah.
It doesn't even say, it doesn't say ICE. It just says police, and they're in unmarked cars.
We've also had conduct where when they detain people, let's say they're in immigration custody and they're being processed, they can lie to you. They can tell you things about the way if you sign this paper, you could just come back. Your family can petition for you. You could come back. They give terrible advice. We've seen them do that, and they have no repercussions.
Isn't that entrapment?
Well, not technically, because I'm telling folks, like, they're not looking for your best interest.
Gotcha.
Entrapment is more if you're saying,
you're right.
Like, tell me what happened, and, confessing to something. But it's more about,
they don't care because they're like, oh, they're going to be gone.
Giving you bad advice.
Gotcha.
You signing a deportation, that's less work for them. Now they don't got to take you to the detention center. You know what I'm saying? Their numbers are high. Oh, this person deported. Boom. Next, so it's a lot of that as well. Like, they're gonna come to homes, you can not open the door. If they go to an employment job site, your boss, the owner of the business, can close the door and not let them in either, because that is a private place as well. Churches are private places. And then we saw some stuff about the schools. The schools didn't allow them in.
I was just going to ask you about that. So,
but it's a lot different because, then they went to the Home Depot. They caught folks out there, or they waited for people to be on their way to work. And then once they hit the block, they're going to pull them over.
So I was going to ask you about the school. Good thing you brought it up. I got a message the other day because I have 2 girls in high school and I got a kid in elementary. And obviously, you could tell, the schools know who comes from backgrounds of immigrants, right? Like, kids their parents might be illegally here. And we got a notification that said, don't worry, we understand the administration, blah, blah, blah. We're not here to
do their work.
To do their work, identify kids of illegal immigrants or kids that might be illegal themselves. How true is that? Can schools report that, or?
Yeah, so it depends on the district. LAUSD is one of the districts that came out previously and said, we are not asking for a status, and we are not going to inquire about the parent's status, and we are not going to do ICE's job. We're not going to turn over information.
Gotcha.
Right? But there are schools in other cities and counties and other places that might be more favorable, like more open to doing that for them and helping them and have those tendencies to be favorable.
There's no safe space per se.
So it really just depends on the district and the school and what policy they decided to implement. Okay. Just like LA decided to pass the sanctuary city, right? So they're saying we're not going to use our resources to do ICE's job, but it also doesn't prevent ICE from coming into a city.
Yeah, because I saw that he declared, well, we don't care if you're a sanctuary city, we're still going to come through with all full force.
I'm confused on that though. How does any immigration law apply to entering like an elementary school where it doesn't have to do anything to do with the criminals, anything like that? So why would they even have that privilege to even try to go to a school?
I think that it's part of the intimidation tactics. I think that, they understand that there's families that, are debating whether they're even going to send kids to school.
Yeah.
In places like Florida and Texas, I mean, they're going to actually be solidified by the political laws and the vibe that they have there, the political culture they have there. And so there's places that, unfortunately, we live in a bubble here, but unfortunately, there's a lot of other school districts that are going to be open to that and allow this kind of enforcement. Does it fall in the enforcement priorities? Right now, everyone is a priority that is in the country without permission. It's sad, but there also there was a time where there was also family detention centers and detention centers. I went to volunteer at one in Texas, and they have the children detained with their moms, and that is unfortunate. You see, they're not in handcuffs, but they're also not able to leave, and they're in a facility with officers that are, speaking another language and, restricting them. I mean, even when I went to volunteer, we weren't allowed to take any supplies. They can't take them back to the room. They can't take coloring books or crayons, depending on those. And so family detention is real. And it was here. It was here under the Obama administration.
Yeah.
And I think that, we won't be shocked if they come back, because there's so many also deals happening with private prisons, and there's a lot of money there for folks that want to develop private prisons again.
Yeah, prison complex. It's one of my other major.
Yeah, that's the thing with the DOJ. That's why he's saying he's trying to privatize DOJ.
Yeah, I have a question. So, obviously I'm an employer, and I know the people that have their businesses too. So there was this thing that people were saying that if your business, I know restaurant owners, right? And they say, my place is a public business, so they have every right to come in here. Is that true, or is it that they can walk in, but you can right away?
I mean, you're the owner of a business. You can also refuse service. You can refuse service, and you can also refuse to let people inside of your business without a warrant as an employer. But, obviously there's things that are changing left and right. And you always want to have a good contact in case that does happen, because what I was mentioning to you was that when they're coming in, say they want to implement a law about about checking your E-Verify or checking your employment history, typically they're going to need a warrant for that. Or you're going to have to be under an investigation for that. You can't just freely give up all your information either. And so I think those are things that, you always want to make sure you're keeping tabs with, an attorney that can suggest direct information to your situation. But a restaurant, same thing. The restaurant can close and have a private event, and they don't have to serve the public. So it's not technically, it would be more of just simply the metros being out in public, going to a restaurant. Going to a movie theater or some place that people are coming in and out of. If the owners are not closing the doors, then they're free to go in. So it also takes a lot of our community to decide what side you're going to stand on. Yeah.
That's so one of the interesting and controversial things that passed through Congress, actually, it wasn't even Trump, was a Laken Riley Act.
The Laken
and
Riley,
there was a lot of questions regarding that. Obviously, I don't know if you know about the situation that happened with the girl that got killed, Laken Riley. That was her name.
Laken Riley, yeah.
So, Congress passed this law now that if you're detained for even if it's theft, which is the controversial part, because it could be petty theft, that they can detain you and actually just,
turn you over to ICE. Or you could be subject to mandatory detention. So, case Laken Riley law needs to be signed. But in North Carolina, there was a murder of a young college student or nursing student. And the person that was accused of a murder was an undocumented person from Venezuela. And That person had previously had run-ins with the law, they're saying. And so a lot of the run-ins were minor offenses, which normally in a police jurisdiction, the police will, if it's like a petty theft, you're not going to be jailed. You're going to be released on your own recognizance. But so there was that situation where they're using an example out of a person that had multiple offenses, and then they're subjecting basically everyone now to, even if you are not convicted of those crimes, even if you were just arrested. So even just an arrest will subject you to the ICE, to being under ICE custody, to going to being held so that you can go to ICE, so they can transfer you to ICE. But also, even if you're in immigration custody, you're under what's called mandatory detention. Typically, in immigration custody, a person is able to do a bond, but
as long as they're waiting legal
for their case,
gotcha,
yes,
okay.
yes, and they're do a bond so that they can continue to fight their case.
But with this, they were just finding them guilty. Well, not guilty, but
this would basically erase any of our constitutional protections that you're proven, guilty. You're innocent until proven guilty.
Gotcha.
So you're just pretty much out the door for folks that are undocumented.
So that's the controversial issue, because technically you could walk out of a store and somebody can be, hey, you stole something. And
then you get arrested.
You get arrested, even though you didn't, you know what I mean? So that a lot of people are saying that it's profiling pretty much, and that it's unconstitutional because of that. And it's going to lead to a lot of like unwrongful people being sent back,
Yeah.
So, the other question we got a lot of is, from your experience and from what you're seeing, what do you think the future of DACA is going to be now?
Yeah, I mean, it's on it potentially could be on his radar. It could potentially be on the radar. What we saw in Trump first time around was that he did want to end the program.
Yeah.
And the first time around, it went to the courts, and then the courts had the case in Supreme Court, and that's being decided. But yeah, I think the only thing preventing him is that it's in the courts right now, so you can't do much about that since it's the issue still there. But the first time he wanted to get rid of it, and he was able to stop new applicants from applying. So folks that wanted to apply and didn't get their applications approved in time were no longer eligible. And there was like thousands and thousands of people in that limbo. Then there was also the situation with the DACA program. Was a lot of people didn't know that, but in 2017, there's a little like clause that says if you let your DACA expire and more than 1 year lapses between when it expired, you can't renew it. You're not in the renewable grounds. You're in the new applicants grounds. So instead of your application going through the renewal process, now you're being treated like a first-time applicant. And a lot of folks didn't know that. And a lot of folks lost their DACA because they didn't apply within the 1 year to do the renewal.
Got another question.
Yes.
I served in the military. I did 8 years almost in the Marine Corps. And I had friends that came into the military that were promised, legal status. Mm-hmm. They were basically recruiting non-residents or residents and offering legal status once they, went through the military. Unfortunately, we've seen cases where veterans are being deported. Mm-hmm. Like you said, even for minor crimes, things are, misdemeanors or whatever, traffic stops or whatever. And there's a big community in Tijuana. I don't know if you've ever dealt with them, but there's a big community of veterans that were deported that never got their legal status because of that. Is there anything they can do or their families can do? Or have you heard anything? I don't know if you've...
I mean, the resources, there's a lot of projects, veterans, deported veterans projects, but many of them also did receive legal permanent status. And unfortunately, legal permanent status isn't a citizenship. So you could still be deported as a legal permanent resident. And so folks they got their legal permanent residency probably, and then they ended up having like a drug offense and they got deported. And so there are projects, veterans defense projects, where they're helping them get criminal vacators. So you would go back to the criminal court, reopen that case, vacate the charge that made them deportable, and then they're able to come back. We were seeing instances that, maybe they were illegally deported, unlawfully deported, and so then you would try to reopen their immigration case. But there are certain projects. They're mostly based in San Diego. The families could look up like deported veterans projects. There's probably going to be resources there. Okay. Groups that are specifically, the ACLU even, I think, did a report about that as well. They're specifically for folks that, it's a shame that you basically sacrificed and, gave your life to defend, and then you're being treated like that. But unfortunately, that as I was mentioning before, with crimes, it's like something that in the criminal side, there needs to be more advocates. And I think they're doing a better job in LA County about having an immigration side to like the public defender's office and whatnot. But there needs to be advocates in the criminal side to make sure that you're looking at consequences so they don't become this illegal, impacting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot of the things that are very public. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that people aren't really talking about that we don't know about that we should be aware of?
I mean, I'm going on doing Know Your Rights, and I'm really just telling folks like that they need to assess where they are. And I think that it's helpful to have your standard. I'm going to remain silent. I'm not going to give them much information. I'm not going to open the door. But we also are not going to live like that, where you're going to be home all day. Mm. So what I'm telling folks is that the best tool is to know where you stand, what you've done in your case. Some people might be eligible for something. They might be able to fix their status, and they just never knew about it. I think we were talking about that recently right now with the U visa. There's folks that were victims of a crime. They cooperated with authorities. And they basically, if you cooperate and you get the police to certify this document, then you can apply for your status as a U visa victim, as a victim of a crime. And these kinds of petitions will pardon deportations. They pardon some crimes. They pardon entries in and out of the U.S. And so we've been able to use that to defend folks that probably thought they never had an opportunity to fix, but because they were victims of crimes, or their kids when they were minors were victims of crimes. So I think that what we're not telling enough of our folks is that they need to have their own asesoría about their own case, because following the like general advisals, it's not going to be enough. Mm-hmm. But if you have a petition, like I was mentioning to you, if you're a U visa, then, you can maybe show that paper. They can see that you have something pending. They will see that you got approved conditionally or something. But that is probably something that's not in our community being talked about enough. I think we just want to tell people there's a raid over here. That's not helpful. That is not helpful if it's not confirmed. It creates a lot of hysteria. Like, people are legitimately scared already, and then making false, like, oh, there's a raid over here, or we saw at CBP. That also counters what we're trying to do with our community, to make our community feel safer. And then, like I said, getting an asesoría about your own individual case. And then just like, not leaving the country unless you've talked to somebody that you fully understand what the consequence of that is. Because the moment somebody leaves the country, if they've lived here 20, 30 years, they have a castigo. Yeah. And they might not be able to come back for 10 years in many cases. So it's a big drastic change. Another adoption, people are calling me about adoption. Like, should someone who's undocumented put their kids for adoption to a family member or friend? That's a very drastic step. And having to go through a legal adoption, and then it might even hurt your own case, because say you needed to have a child that was born here in the future, for future purposes. Now you don't have legal authority over that child. So I don't encourage things like that. I encourage you to look at other avenues that are more temporary, like a power of attorney, like a short-term guardianship. But taking also these drastic moves without a good assessment is going to sometimes have bad consequences.
That brings up a good question. What happens if you're undocumented, but you, for example, they stop you and you're with your family? What happens to the kids?
Yeah.
How are they? What's the situation that occurs there? The parents can maybe take him, but what happens to the children?
What I experienced with most of my cases is that they will do after they dropped off their kids. So I've had clients where they dropped off their kids and then they get them in the corner. So they were already like vigilándolos. They're already looking after them. And once they dropped off their kids at school, the next block they were getting picked up. So if the kids are with them, if they are with their family, then sometimes, they're going to call Child Protective Services or ask somebody to come in and get them. But for the most part, we hadn't seen much of, they can't deport a U.S. citizen. So we don't see that much of a situation. But I think families also are in fear. So the kids will want to leave the country. And that's another aspect that I'm telling folks, like if your kids are U.S. citizens, then maybe you want to have their documentos en orden, their passports en orden, just because if you're forced to leave, your child leaves and they don't leave with the passport, they're going to have a hard time coming back. Or if you leave, if you're deported and then your child stays here, it's going to be hard to get a passport done if you're abroad because you need special permissions for somebody to get it for you. So there's things to kind of prepare in case, but it's also just good to have those documents with the climate that we're in to show that you're a citizen.
I have another question.
Yes.
And I'm sure this relates to a lot of our listeners. You know, a lot of our parents come here very young, right?
Yeah.
And then they leave parents, brothers, or whatever behind. I've heard, I don't know if this is true, that's what I'm asking. Is there a special
Program or?
Not program. Like when somebody passes away, right? Like let's say a mom passes away. Is there a special grant or permiso que les dan to go, or does that not exist? Because I know that in our community, I've heard it. We're like, si te dan permiso, nomás tienes que preguntar. Is that not true?
No, because there's advanced parole. There's permission that you ask beforehand to leave the country, but you have to have a pending petition.
Gotcha.
You have to have a DACA or you have to have a residency. You have to have something filed, and then you would ask for the permiso, advanced parole, where you're saying, can I have permission to come back? And if they approve it, then you have a document saying, I've been given permission to come back.
Gotcha.
But that is common that folks, family member pass away, mother or brothers, whatever, siblings, and then they leave without that permission because they probably don't have a petition pending, and they leave. The moment they step out, even if they were not detained, even if they were not caught by ICE, even if they think that ICE will never know that the immigration, USCIS, they'll never know that they left, that is the moment that the 10-year castigo starts. And you're not allowed to come back unless you have specific permission or perdón. And a lot of folks often come and say, well, they're not going to know I left. And I'm like, I get calls from people that got stuck because they went to some other attorney that said that they would never know. And they found an airline flight under their name.
Yeah,
they confronted them. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, because you did leave, and there's proof that you left somewhere in the system. It's going to be somewhere.
Yeah.
So I always also encourage folks to look at those programs that churches do and community orgs do, where the family member can come to the U.S. So if they're above 65 or so years old and you haven't seen your family member and they're able to come in a grupo. They come in like 30, 40 people, and they have reuniones here. A lot of times that's done by community orgs or by churches. I know one in specific that has done that for many, many families.
So they're granted permiso from Mexico to come here.
The folks that are like, su mamá y su papá that are in their pueblo, then go to the consulado, to the embassy to get the visa. But because they go in a group, they're more likely to be approved because it's part of a program. And then they're able to get their visas and come and go back and forth with the visa instead of the person leaving and facing.
That's how my grandma used to come like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do people have sanctuary at consulados? here, like the Mexican consulate or the Guatemalan consulate, can an immigrant
Seek sanctuary.
seek sanctuary there? Like if he was being pursued or
I guess
anything?
if the government would allow it, I mean, I think that it would then break into the whole like diplomatic relationships that they have, and they would probably create kind of like a controversy between the diplomacy between them.
Because the U.S. could do it abroad. If you go to their embassy, if you're an American citizen, you're covered.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work vice versa.
Yeah.
Right now, you talk about sanctuary, right? Somebody asked me this yesterday. They said, they say Los Angeles is a sanctuary city, right? But yeah, we see ICE in there. They wanted to know exactly what sanctuary city means.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier where it was like that they're saying we're not going to use our resources. We're not going to collaborate. We're not going to just turn folks over to ICE, but it doesn't stop ICE from doing their own action. Same thing kind of happened with the license that they were giving out in California for folks that didn't have socials. The AB60 program is that the DMV would say, we will collect information and we'll have the data, but we're not going to send it over to ICE. We're not going to give them all of the people who applied for these license information, but it didn't stop ICE from being able to get access to that information.
How would they get access to that?
They would get like an order or, some type of they're just their system, their database. And so I'm not particularly sure what ways they would do that, but I do know that a lot of times we would get calls. Somebody renewed their license, and then a few weeks later, ICE was at the door because now they had their most updated information. Similar to what we were talking about, DACA. The amount of, I would also say, and I don't study this enough. I don't do a lot of these like, shows that kind of cover like what information the government has of us or not, but the amount of information that is available, like the cyber, like just the databases that are created, especially after 9/11, it's impossible. It's difficult to be under the radar. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So the biometrics are like, for example, Facebook. They can get people's information on Facebook. Yeah. They probably are looking up people and where they're at and what they're doing, or when they file taxes, because that is federal, or you get what I'm saying? So it's like the amount of places that folks are like, well, I'm afraid to file my petition because then they're going to know where I'm at. Most of the time when I send for WAYAS or anything like that, I put my address for my office. But when folks say that, I'm also like, if you are already doing things like getting a credit card, if you're filing taxes, if you have a license, the amount of information that's available is there.
Yeah, and you're right. I was watching. I like watching like shows about hacking and stuff.
Yeah, I don't really get to watch a lot of that, but I would like to. Yeah,
and there was a program done by the government where they were doing tapping into it was for national security purposes, and that's what Snowden. That's why he got. Yeah, he's actually the one that built it.
Yeah.
And he said,
he's the one that leaked that.
Yeah, he's like, I can't. This is not legal. He went and became a whistleblower, and now he's in. I don't know if he's still free or not.
No, he's in Russia, I think.
He's in Russia free, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's free or not.
And that was the whole point. It was not to profile each individual.
And it just is crazy to me when you see like Inauguration Day and who was in the front row. Amazon. How many folks order from Amazon?
Alphabet, Google,
Facebook, Meta. They're there too. So there's just like, it's crazy how we also are part of this system where, we really can't go low pro, undercover at all.
And the government has had profiles on us in the 70s, Nixon with Watergate, the scandal, right? Tapping people's phones and things like that. But now we're willingly giving our information.
Oh, yeah. This was the whole TikTok. Yeah. Why do you think he didn't want TikTok to go away? and these people don't see it. It's like, save TikTok, blah, blah, blah. Well, you'll get what you get when you find out from the government.
Yeah. I'm even going to, a sporting event.
Yeah.
You can't get into a sporting place sometimes without those access. For many years, I didn't want to do TSA stuff, but, at this point, it's like, they have everything.
Yeah. We've touched on people that are undocumented.
Yes.
People that are citizens. What about the people that are residents?
Yeah,
Some people are concerned about that they might get profiled and that it can be removed.
Yeah.
Is that actually a thing that can happen?
Typically, a resident must have a hearing, and only a judge can revoke their status. Okay. So they're afforded that due process that they would have a hearing and a judge revoke their status. But then there's, the line and everything is but. So then there's those folks that unfortunately are residents with aggravated felonies and maybe coming out of prison, and they're put into a different category where they have a ICE detainer ready for them, and they're basically sent to the judge, or they voluntarily can sign to renounce their residency. And that detainer is also subject to very, very strict rules that as a resident, if you have certain disqualifying crimes, you can get deported because of that. So just drugs, sales, or anything that is violent crimes, anything you went to prison for over a year, like things. There's obviously there's a lot of categories, but there's certain places where I've had residents that I've represented 20, 30 years of residency, and one crime could do it all, and they were facing deportation. So their resident status is not ever going to be a permanent, safe place. That's why we encourage folks to also talk to an attorney to see if they qualify for citizenship. And what ends up happening with residents that we saw in the first administration too was they were being stopped at the borders, and there was folks that, like, the officers would say also, like, do you want to sign a voluntary a voluntary renunciation of your residency? So they'd get their residency. If they sign that off, then they get their residency taken as well. Under engaños, under the false information. So residents should also be getting information as to whether they should even apply for citizenship, and what kind of consequences they have. There's residents that don't live in the U.S., that they've got the residency and they live abroad and they come here and there. That could be another reason they take it away. If you can't show that you have to be here,
active here, right?
You have to be, yeah.
So there's no rule changes as far as, for example, if you've been a resident for a certain amount of years and applying for citizenship, they're not going to put a stop to that. They're not going to put a freeze on that.
I haven't heard anything with that yet, but the current general information is that if you're a resident and you have a U.S. citizen spouse and you apply, you could apply at the 3-year mark. So you could not have to wait the 5 years.
Okay.
But generally other folks that are not in that category, you wait 5 years. And if you meet the requirements of taxes, good moral character, you didn't lie when you got your residency, you don't have any crimes and that disqualify you, then yes, then you can apply for citizenship. Okay. If you qualify, yeah. You
said are we live already?
Yeah, we're live right now.
Now, can we go maybe for like 5-10 minutes, see if anybody has any questions? Do we have any people on there?
I don't know if anybody's asked. That's why I put it on a little early just to get the crowd. I did want to talk about resources. Obviously you're an attorney and you're a resource. One of the biggest resources was shut down, CBP1, which was an app that a lot of people were using. Obviously that's going to have a big consequence for a lot of people because thousands of people were using that app.
That was for the asylum seekers,
to check their statuses and things like that. Is there any other resources that you can let the public know about?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great nonprofits out there. One of my favorites is Immigrant Defenders, Defenders. They're here in LA. There's also rapid response teams. So depending on what city you're in, there's a rapid response line set up, and you basically can talk to an intake team or an attorney from the nonprofit that runs that program. Obviously, you want to also check that they are from a nonprofit, not just random numbers you're calling, but those are resources set up that they could try to guide you to the right folks. If you do have the ability to talk to an attorney before anything and just to, make sure that you have a plan and a strategy, that's always good. there's other organizations here in LA. Some of them have grants for certain things. So so you had to get your DACA renewal. There's an organization that would do that for you. If there's folks that are in proceedings and, they have some grants, like LA had a fund where they were helping to support representation. Immigration court, you're not afforded an attorney. You don't get an attorney assigned to you like a criminal case.
Gotcha.
And that was the other controversy with the Laken Riley case is that, so in criminal court, you have the ability to have a court appointed attorney at no cost. And basically they would be doing the same thing in immigration and to be accusing somebody of a crime or the person be held for this crime, but they wouldn't have the ability to be afforded an attorney. Immigration also they just got one of the orders came out that they got rid of the programs that they had at immigration. They were called legal assistance programs that the government would set up to have an attorney or an organization there to help folks. And they're not going to be there anymore. They're not going to be able to be outside of the courts and giving people general information like they used to be. But IM Defenders in LA is one of my favorite. I also work with the indigenous org called Cielo, Comunidades en Liderazgo, Indígenas en Liderazgo. And they're here in LA as well for, the community of indigenous folks that are coming, and often suffer from language access. So there's folks that, speak a different language that and people, assume that just because you're from Mexico or Guatemala, that you, for example, that you speak Spanish, and folks don't. They speak
Their dialect.
they're variation languages. They're languages, but they're a variation. And so depending on their pueblo and their comunidad. And so it's important to have access to that. And so Cielo is one of the organization that leads that fight here in LA. And I've often supported them on doing some Know Your Rights for the community.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think we had a question.
You pass the phone this way.
So
We're live on the phone, by the way.
sorry.
Yeah.
So one person asked, how far in advance do you recommend to apply for DACA renewals?
Right now there was, the suggestion is 6 months, but yeah, I've done some even further than that. It really just depends on, what your attorney review on the case. I've done them 6 months. I've done them a little bit earlier than that. Yeah.
So I do have a question also.
Yes.
I do have a lot of so my field is mechanical engineering, and there is a lot of trade. I've seen a lot of other companies, competition companies, some manufacturing companies use visas to bring employees from other countries. And I know that they're really cutting down on the immigration stuff, but they're being more relaxed as far as visas for bringing labor from overseas. Is that an actual thing, or is it going to be more difficult, or what's the process like?
I think with having folks like Elon Musk in his ear, that they're going to have that debate. My understanding is he did want to cut down on that, and they were talking about cutting down on that. But I think that's one of the issues that Elon Musk brought up, and then we kind of saw their back and forth fight online. I do often get asked, can I petition my worker? Can I petition my nanny? Can I petition someone that is here already? And unfortunately, there's the element of, yes, you could petition folks, but then can they get status? Probably not if they entered without permission, if they entered with the visa and they've overstayed their visa. So those employment visas are technically designed for you to bring someone who is abroad and to come into the U.S. and then obviously have that renewal process of it. But folks that are already here at some point or another have violated their status. So they can't just convert their status because those are very tricky visas to do. So I think that we're going to see that play out. I think right now what we're seeing on the forefront is this mass deportation tagline, this mass deportation in your face changes.
Do you think it's a temporary thing just to kind of appeal to the base, or do you think it's going to die out like in a couple of months? It'll be something that, or you think it's going to be consistently something that we have to be prepared for?
Come on, bro.
I mean, like she said, it's an intimidation tactic.
Yeah, but he's going to use it for as much as he can, bro.
But I mean, there is repercussions economy wise. There's a lot of things that can change that, I guess. But you know, I
think it's going to have to do with in a few months if there's certain people in his ear still. If there's certain people, because we also saw that in the first administration, there was a lot of turnover as to the people that were involved in some of these decisions and the people that were in his leadership. And we're not seeing many of those people back. We're seeing another set of people. And so I think that's where we have more of a gauge as to like whether, for example, Stephen Miller is still there. You know, whether, for example, the Musk, the Bezos, and, you know, Mark Zuckerberg are going to still be there, or if they're going to like peace out, because I think they give him a little bit more of the other side of the debate.
Yeah, and I've already heard they're beefing. Elon Musk and Trump. Apparently, Elon Musk wanted a part of the West Wing.
Well, he was supposed to have an office there.
Yeah, and then Trump said, "No." Actually, it wasn't even Trump. It was another one of his advisors says, "Nah, get this guy out of here."
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is that like there's right now it's this situation. You saw them all at the inauguration, but then who knows in a month, 2 months, like because there's so much personality. There's so many people with their agendas there.
Now, what can we do? Obviously, you know, there's been talks about like, you know, Mark Zuckerberg was there, people, you know, boycotting Meta, people boycotting Amazon because of these things. What can we do? Obviously, we're American citizens. What can we do to help our community? Because our community is important to us. So what can we do to help or
so many things, but I think that linking up with some of the orgs that probably need help right now, they're going to need support on the ground, you know, with spottings, with checking. Like, for example, it's the most simplest thing. If there's somebody that puts out a alert that they're on the corner of X street and X street and you're around there, go and check and verify and then come back and report, because, you know, those are like simple things, right? But then there's also the ability to maybe support our community if they do want to do a strike. If there is a day without immigrants, maybe, then we, you know, would be there with support on maybe the financial side of it so that people can have their day's worth of that they're going to lose that day, or some type of like, I'm just thinking these mega marchas too, they're also a vulnerable place for people to be at. So we have to step up to the plate for that. You know, as an attorney, I do my part as to representing folks, but as a community, just holding more opportunities to embrace folks that are scared in our communities. And I tell people too, like if your neighbors, you know, talk to your neighbors. So then if somebody is outside your door and you don't know who they are, at least your neighbor could text you and tell you, you know, son de la policía, o tal vez no son de la policía, son, you know, tienen otro like emblem or something, you know.
I wouldn't be able to ask that in my neighborhood. Yeah. Like 60-70% are Trumpers.
Yeah, but I'm saying that if you lived in a community where folks are undocumented, then we have to support each other.
Yeah.
Right? We have to be there for each other. And I think that I think that right now the organizations are so overwhelmed with the amount of calls and folks that are in panic, giving good information, being out here providing good information to folks is important.
Yeah. We usually have a segment that's called Words of Wisdom, where we have our guests, you know, kind of say something that they lived by, or just for people out there. I'm not sure if you want to say something that you grew up, you know, living, or if you want to give a message to the people out there as just to, you know, like just to kind of like, I guess, calm the fear or whatever. The platform is yours. We kind of just want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, I grew up in a home where we're faith-based, faith believers. My mom, that's why she does the things she was doing when we were growing up, and refuge and providing refuge for people. And then I also spent a lot of summers in Guatemala with my grandmother, who had a church, but in the church they had a temporary home for women whose husbands were in the U.S., indigenous women whose husbands were in the U.S., or they were no longer there, and they were basically, either widowed or single moms. And what I've learned through that is that we have to have faith for this, the hope that there's a better day, that there's going to be a better day. So if we lose our faith, then all of that goes to waste. We're not going to see a better day because if we don't have that faith. So I try to live by that just everything is very temporal. We live in a world that, is constantly changing. 4 years ago, we were talking about other things and now we're here again. And so I just, we just got to live our life with faith and have hope that things will get better for whatever the circumstances are. And I think that that's the only place we can hang tight to. That's the only place we can hang tight to is having a faith in a better day in the future.
And I think I'm gonna add to it a little bit. I think that, just the building of the community. I think for so long we're divided in a lot of things. And this is one thing that we all have in common. We all know someone or have a family member that's undocumented or has been undocumented or came here. We're sons of immigrants, daughters of immigrants. So I think it's a good time for a community to just come together and kind of spread that.
Yeah. And I do want to say one thing. Guys, we are not here to give you legal advice on anything because we are for sure nowhere legal advisors. And our attorney here that is present, she's giving you some of the insight on some of the cases she's worked with. So this might apply to you, this might not apply to you.
Yeah.
As she said it, it's hace una asesoría de tu caso and you could go with her. She's going to give you your info in a little bit. Or you can go with another attorney, but make sure the key part is informing yourself. Because if you don't, you're going to walk into a notario. It's going to take you 10 G's. And that's what going to do shit for you. I'm telling you, because I had cousins that went through it. I had tias that went through it. They went to a notario, spent 10 G's, and all because that's how it's been done for the past 10 years. So that's all I want to say.
And obviously I can assess every case on a show because I do a 30 question intake. I want to dig in and figure out what's there. So this is all general information and it doesn't really help unless you get your own personal asesoramiento with somebody who is an attorney.
Where can people find you?
I'm on Facebook, on Instagram as Abogada Santiago, or you can call our office at 323-696-0595.
We want to thank you, Cynthia, because like I said, this month alone has felt like it's been a year. It's been long, and there's been there's been panic and there's been a lot of misinformation. And that's one of the things we talked about. And I'm glad that you told me to wait till after the election so we can really dive into what happened. And, thank you for your work and for helping the community.
Thank you for coming on a Sunday. I mean, it's raining today. Hopefully it helps out the fires because, we're still suffering from the fires. Yeah. But we want to say thank you for coming and taking some time.
And speaking about the fires, there's a lot of folks that are scared to ask for the resources. They are not asking for status. There's some resources that require status, but if you have a mixed status family, so I would just say that too, feel free to reach out to my office and then I'll direct you to the right people. But a lot of our folks were impacted by those fires, also the workers. Yeah. I know 2 organizations that are also giving funds to the workers that were impacted that lost their jobs in Palisades, for example. And so we just have to support each other as a community and we'll, share the resources that are out there.
Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. We'll see you guys next show.